My name is Isabella Carter. I'm 26 years old. And what you're about to hear is the kind of story you'd expect from a movie. Except, it happened. To me. Everyone in my family said I'd end up alone, that I was too much, too driven, too stubborn, or simply not the kind of girl someone marries. For a while, I believed them. I let their words sink deep into my bones, shaping how I saw myself and the world. I stopped dressing up for family dinners. I stopped dreaming out loud. I stopped expecting to be loved the way I deserved. But then something happened that none of them expected. And it all started on a warm spring afternoon in Huntsville, Alabama, when I dared to want more. Before I go deeper into this painful part of my story, I want you to do something for me. Drop your name and where you're listening from in the comments. I want to know who's on the other side of the screen, who's strong enough to hear the truth that most people avoid. Because what I'm about to say next isn't easy. It's the part I stayed silent about for years. But maybe, just maybe, someone out there is living through something similar, and they need to know they're not alone. If you're still here, stay with me. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss how this all ends. Because trust me, you'll want to hear what happened next. Growing up in a Southern family that wore politeness like armor and passed judgment like heirlooms was exhausting. Every Thanksgiving and Christmas felt like a trial. My cousins were the golden children, engaged by 23, married by 25, with perfectly edited baby announcements on Instagram. Meanwhile, I was the career girl, the one who chose to work late instead of baking casseroles, the one who didn't show up with a boyfriend on her arm. At first, they said nothing. Then the comments started. You know, Isabella, being independent is fine, but don't you think it's time to settle down? Clock's ticking, sweetheart. You better lock someone down before it's too late. They said it with smiles, always with smiles, but each word chipped away at my silence. At first, I rolled my eyes. Then I laughed. Eventually, I started questioning myself in the mirror. Was I really unlovable? Was I hard to be with? The worst came from my own mother. She said it once during a family barbecue, half drunk on cheap white wine and sour memories. I just don't want you to die alone, Isabella. No one wants to die alone. The sentence hit harder than anything else. Because deep down, I feared she might be right. At work, I was killing it. I'd landed a regional management position at a logistics company, and I traveled often between Birmingham and Atlanta. I had a sleek apartment, a rescue cat named Maxine, and a closet full of tailored blazers and ambition. But at night, it was just me, and the echo of their words in my head. I didn't meet him in a fairy tale way. His name was Nathan, and we met in a grocery store parking lot when my car wouldn't start. He offered to help, even though he was clearly in a rush. He wore a navy t-shirt and had that kind of quiet confidence that makes you wonder if he's seen more than he lets on. He got my engine running, and instead of saying goodbye, he asked if I wanted to grab coffee sometime. I almost said no. I almost let the years of self-doubt win. But I said yes. That yes changed everything. Nathan wasn't like the men I'd dated before. He didn't flinch at my sarcasm or get threatened by my job title. He asked questions that made me think. He listened, truly listened, and the more I opened up, the more he stayed. Steady, present, honest. We started slow, mostly because I didn't trust it. I was waiting for the mask to fall, for the catch. But months went by, and he never gave me a reason to doubt him. Of course, I kept him from my family for a while. Not out of shame, out of self-preservation. I didn't want them poisoning something good. But the day came when Nathan said, I want to meet them. I want them to know who I am. I hesitated, then agreed. We showed up for my cousin's engagement party, a garden-themed ordeal with matching floral napkins and live acoustic music. Nathan wore a blue button-down. I wore the only dress in my closet that made me feel like I belonged. And we walked into that backyard together, hand in hand. The silence was thick. My aunt gave me a forced hug. My uncle raised his eyebrows. My mother sipped from her wine glass a little faster than usual. But Nathan didn't flinch. He shook every hand, answered every question, complimented the spread. He even helped my grandmother with her chair when no one else offered. I should have known right then. He was a storm coming quietly. The whispers came after. Who's that with Isabella? He seems too good for her. Maybe he doesn't know what she's like yet. I heard it. I heard all of it. But Nathan, he didn't. Or maybe he did, because 3 weeks later he told me he had a plan. Something big. Something he needed me to trust. I thought it was a vacation. Maybe a romantic dinner? What I didn't know was that he had something else in mind. Something bold. Something unforgettable. Something that would shatter every label they had ever put on me. Because Nathan wasn't just planning a proposal. He was planning a declaration. To them. To me. To everyone who had ever looked at me like I'd be alone forever. But before we get there, you need to understand what came next. You need to know what happened the night before. The message I received. The betrayal I discovered. The memory I nearly erased. Because revenge, real revenge, doesn't come from rage. It comes from pain. And that pain started long before Nathan ever knelt to the ground. It started the night I learned what my family had really been saying behind my back. What they really believed. And what one of them, someone I trusted, tried to do to make sure I'd never be loved. So if you think this is just a love story, think again. This is the story of how I lost everything, just long enough to take it all back. And when I did, I made sure they remembered. Every word, every whisper, every warning, because nothing screams revenge louder than a kiss in front of those who swore you'd never be kissed at all. The night before everything changed, I was alone in my apartment, packing an overnight bag for what Nathan called a surprise I'd never forget. He was picking me up early the next morning, and although he'd kept the details to himself, his excitement had been impossible to hide. That boyish grin of his gave everything away. He was planning something big. Still, I had no idea it involved my family. Not yet. Maxine, my cat, was curled up by the window when my phone buzzed. At first, I ignored it, assuming it was a work email or a last-minute text from Nathan. But when it buzzed again and then again, I finally grabbed it. There were 3 new messages, all from my cousin Jenna, the one who had smiled the brightest at the engagement party, who had hugged Nathan like they were instant best friends. I opened the first message and felt the blood drain from my face. You should know what your family really thinks of you. Attached was a screenshot of a group chat. Not just any group chat, my family's. The cousins, the aunts, the uncles, even my own mother. They had a thread without me, and in that thread were dozens of messages about me, about Nathan, about how pathetic I looked trying to show off a boyfriend to prove a point, how they were sure Nathan was just being polite, and probably didn't know how dramatic Isabella really was. One message stood out above the rest. My mother's. He'll leave like the others. I just hope she doesn't embarrass herself too badly this time. I sat there staring at the screen, trying to process the betrayal. It wasn't just gossip. It wasn't harmless venting. It was cruelty. A coordinated dismissal of everything I had fought for. The confidence, the healing, the hope. And it wasn't coming from strangers. It was coming from people who were supposed to love me. My hands trembled as I scrolled through more screenshots. Some messages were older, some recent. All of them painted the same picture. A family that never believed in me, that waited for me to fail, that saw my independence as arrogance and my silence as weakness. They didn't just expect me to end up alone. They were rooting for it. I called Nathan. I didn't know what I planned to say, but I needed to hear his voice. He picked up on the second ring. Hey, you okay? I just saw something, I whispered. Something I wish I hadn't. I told him everything. The messages, the group chat, my mother's words. There was a long pause on the other end. Then his voice came, calm and steady. Do you trust me? Yes, I said without hesitation. Then let me handle it. What do you mean? You'll see. Just be ready tomorrow. Wear something you love. Something that makes you feel powerful. I didn't sleep that night. I replayed every interaction with my family, wondering how many of their smiles were fake, how many of their kind words were calculated. I remembered birthdays, holidays, graduations, all the times I had felt slightly out of place, but dismissed it as my own insecurity. Maybe it wasn't all in my head. Maybe it never was. The next morning, Nathan arrived with flowers and coffee. He kissed my forehead, told me I looked beautiful, and we drove in silence for a while. I thought we were heading to Birmingham. Instead, we pulled into the driveway of my parents' house. "What are we doing here?" I asked. "You'll see." He stepped out of the car and opened my door like nothing was wrong, like this was just another weekend visit. But my heart was pounding. I wasn't ready to face them, not after what I had read. The house was full. My cousins, aunts, uncles, even my grandmother were gathered in the backyard again, this time for my father's birthday brunch. No one had mentioned it to me. I wasn't invited. Nathan walked ahead of me, holding my hand. As we turned the corner into the yard, a hush fell over the crowd. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. A few jaws dropped. My mother's face went pale. "Isabella," she said, recovering quickly. "I didn't know you were coming. No one told me this was happening," I replied. Nathan squeezed my hand, then let go and stepped forward. He cleared his throat and everyone turned to him. "I know this is unexpected," he began, his voice carrying across the yard, "but I've been thinking a lot about what it means to love someone, to stand by them, to see them for who they really are, not who you think they should be. And I realized something. I don't want to wait another day to make this official." He turned to me. My heart stopped. "I don't care what anyone says. I don't care what they think. I love you, Isabella Carter. You are fierce and brave and full of fire, and you've taught me what it means to truly live. So here, in front of the people who have doubted you, I want to say something very clear." He dropped to one knee. "Will you marry me?" Gasps rippled through the crowd. My hands flew to my mouth. My mother swayed slightly. Someone dropped a plate. I didn't answer right away. Not because I didn't want to, but because I wanted them to feel it, to sit in the weight of the moment, to understand that this wasn't just a proposal, it was a reckoning. "Yes," I said finally, tears in my eyes. 1,000 times yes. Nathan stood and kissed me, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was playing a role. I wasn't pretending to fit in. I wasn't apologizing for being myself. I was just me, and I was loved. But the story didn't end there. Because as we embraced, I looked over Nathan's shoulder and saw my mother staring at us. Her eyes were sharp, unreadable, and that's when I realized she wasn't shocked. She was angry, because she had failed to keep me small, failed to keep me doubting, failed to stop someone from loving me. The next few minutes were a blur of awkward congratulations, fake smiles, and stiff hugs. My father shook Nathan's hand like he was a stranger. My cousins took selfies with me, already planning how to post it online. But I wasn't playing along anymore. I was watching, listening, waiting. Because the moment Nathan had proposed, something had shifted. Not just in my family, but in me. They thought this was over. They thought I had won. But I wasn't done. Not yet. There was more they didn't know. There was someone who had gone further than words. Someone who had tried to sabotage my relationship. Someone who had taken that group chat and turned it into something more. And they were going to find out what it feels like when the girl they underestimated stops playing nice. I didn't say a word during the ride home. My fingers stayed laced with Nathan's, but my mind was somewhere else entirely. I kept replaying the expressions on their faces, especially hers. My mother, the way her lips curled when she saw the ring, the way she masked it behind a slow, tight smile. She wasn't just surprised. She was furious. That kind of fury doesn't come from being caught off guard. It comes from something deeper, from loss, from watching a plan fall apart. That night, after Nathan fell asleep, I went into the kitchen, turned off the lights, and sat with nothing but my phone screen lighting up the dark. I opened the screenshots Jenna had sent me again, scrolling past the same cruel messages, my chest tightening with each line. But something new caught my eye this time, a single line I hadn't noticed before. "Don't worry, I already sent it." It was from my mother, a message dated 2 months ago, sent right after Nathan and I had made things official. The replies under it were full of laughing emojis and cryptic congratulations. My stomach churned. What had she sent? And to whom? That night, I barely slept. By morning, I was obsessed. I needed answers. I didn't care how ugly they were. I called Jenna. She answered almost immediately, her voice cautious. "Hey, I didn't know if you'd call." "Thank you for sending those messages," I said. But I need to know more. What did my mom mean when she said she sent it? Jenna hesitated. You're not going to like it. Tell me anyway. There was an envelope, she said slowly. She mailed it to Nathan's workplace, anonymously. Or at least she thought it was anonymous. What was in it? Copies of everything. The messages, screenshots, even a note she wrote herself pretending to be someone else. It was bad. She made it sound like you were unstable, manipulative, like you were just using him. She even mentioned your ex. I felt like I'd been punched in the chest. I hadn't spoken about my ex to anyone in years. Not after the way it ended. Not after the things he'd said. The lies he'd told. How do you know all this? I asked. Because she asked me to help print it. I didn't know what she was doing at the time, I swear. She said it was for a legal thing, but when I found out, I couldn't sleep. That's why I sent you the messages. I had to. I hung up the phone in a daze. I turned to Nathan, who was pouring coffee in the kitchen like it was just another Tuesday. He looked up and saw the storm in my eyes. You knew, I said. He nodded once. Why didn't you tell me? Because I wanted to see what you'd do. I wanted to know if you'd still stand tall. And you did. He walked toward me, calm, unshaken. I never believed a word of it, Isabella. I read it. I saw what they said. But I know you, and I knew the person who wrote that was desperate, trying to destroy something they couldn't control. Tears burned behind my eyes, but I held them back. Why didn't you confront her? Because it wouldn't have changed anything. She didn't need to be stopped. She needed to be seen. And now? Now she was. But it wasn't enough. Not for me. I wasn't going to let her manipulate, lie, and sabotage, only to be met with silence. I didn't want revenge for the sake of cruelty. I wanted something deeper. I wanted her to feel what I had felt, unseen, unheard, dismissed. I wanted her to know what it was like to be outmaneuvered. So I made a plan. I started small. I spoke with a lawyer, just to understand my rights. Then I gathered everything, every message, every screenshot, every timestamp. I even recovered old voicemails and emails I'd saved from years ago. Patterns started to emerge. This wasn't the first time she'd done something like this. She had interfered in my last relationship too, contacted someone from my ex's past to warn him about me. I hadn't believed it at the time. I thought he was lying, but now, I wasn't so sure. I called my old ex, Lucas. We hadn't spoken in years, and I didn't know what to expect. When he answered, there was a beat of silence. Isabella? Yeah, I'm not calling to rehash anything. I just need to ask you something. He laughed bitterly. I figured this call would come eventually. What do you mean? Your mom reached out to me, back when we were dating, said you had emotional issues, that you were dangerous when cornered. She made it sound like you were some kind of manipulative mess. And I believed her. Why? Because I didn't know better. And because I was looking for an excuse to run. I swallowed hard. Thank you for telling me. He hesitated. I'm sorry for how I left things. I didn't reply. I hung up the phone and stared at the wall, a strange calm washing over me. My entire romantic life had been shaped by her interference, and I was done pretending it didn't matter. The next day, I invited my family over for dinner. Every single one of them, my mother included. Nathan cooked. I set the table. I printed out the screenshots and sealed them in envelopes. I placed one at each person's plate. When they arrived, I smiled like nothing was wrong. My mother walked in, kissed my cheek, and told me how lovely everything looked. Halfway through dinner, I stood. I have a gift for all of you, I said, raising a glass. Something I think you'll find illuminating. They opened the envelopes. Some gasped. Others turned red. My mother froze. I watched her eyes scan the papers, her jaw tightening. I know what you did, I said softly, looking at her. And I'm done pretending I don't. She started to speak, but I raised a hand. No more lies. No more sabotage. You don't get to smile in my face and destroy me behind my back. That version of me, the one who stayed quiet, is gone. She pushed her chair back, stood up, and pointed a trembling finger at Nathan. You manipulated her. You made her turn against us. Nathan smiled. No, ma'am. I just loved her enough to let her see what was already there. My mother left first. Others followed. Some apologized. some didn't. But I didn't care. The house was quiet again. Just Nathan, me, and Maxine curled in her usual spot. "I'm proud of you," he said. I exhaled. "I'm proud of me too." But I wasn't done. Not yet. Because there's something about being underestimated your whole life that creates a fire. And once it's lit, it doesn't die quietly. The morning after the dinner, I stood in front of the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back at me. Not because of how I looked. I still wore the same satin robe, my hair still tangled from sleep, but because of how I felt. There was a stillness in my chest where chaos used to live. I had always imagined standing up to my family would be messy and explosive, but the truth was far quieter. It didn't come with fireworks. It came with silence. Final, irreversible silence. And in that silence, I found something I didn't know I'd lost. Peace. Nathan came up behind me and wrapped his arms around my waist, his chin resting on my shoulder. "You didn't just defend yourself last night," he said. "You reclaimed your voice." His words sank deep, but I knew that healing wasn't immediate. Strength isn't a finish line. It's something you choose every day. And I was about to be tested again. 2 days later, I got a call from my boss. There had been rumors, whispers about my emotional instability, that I had blurred lines between personal and professional life. My jaw clenched as I realized the source. My mother's reach had extended further than I thought. But instead of falling apart, I set up a meeting with HR. I walked in with printed documentation of every attack, every lie, every instance of manipulation that had tried to define me. I laid it all out, calmly, professionally, and without a trace of self-doubt. By the end of the meeting, not only did I still have my job, I had their respect. That moment marked the beginning of a shift in how I saw the world. I no longer moved through it trying to earn approval. I wasn't shrinking myself to avoid conflict. I stopped explaining my choices to people who weren't invested in my happiness. And something beautiful started to happen. I began to receive messages from people I hadn't spoken to in years. Some apologized. Others thanked me. My cousin Jenna, who had sent the screenshots, came by my apartment with a box of homemade cookies and tears in her eyes. "I never had the courage to say no to them," she admitted. "But after what you did, I realized I don't want to be part of that anymore." We talked for hours that night. She told me stories I hadn't heard before. Stories of how my mother had done similar things to others in the family, how she manipulated narratives and isolated anyone who stepped out of line. I wasn't her only target. I was just the one who finally stood up. But the real transformation wasn't happening in my relationships. It was happening in me. I started therapy. I didn't go because I was broken. I went because I wanted to understand the roots of my silence. Why had I let their voices define my worth for so long? Why did their approval still sting when withheld? My therapist, Dr. Owens, was a soft-spoken woman with sharp eyes and a disarming calm. During our first session, she asked me a question I didn't expect. "When was the first time you remember hiding a part of yourself to feel loved?" The answer came faster than I thought. "When I was 7, I said. "I used to pretend I hated science because my mom said it wasn't feminine enough. She wanted me to take dance instead." "And did you?" "I did, for 4 years. That small memory cracked something open. Suddenly, I was flooded with forgotten moments. When I didn't speak up in school for fear of sounding arrogant. When I apologized for winning spelling bees. When I wore dresses instead of jeans just to keep the peace. My entire life had been a series of quiet performances designed to make other people more comfortable. But the performance was over. I stopped going to family events. I didn't send holiday cards. I created boundaries so clear they could have been written in stone. And instead of guilt, I felt relief. Not everyone understood. Some friends drifted away. They said I was being harsh, that family is family, and blood is thicker than water. But here's what they didn't understand. Blood may be thicker than water, but poison is thicker than both. Nathan was my rock through it all. He never pushed, never rushed my healing. He let me unravel and rebuild, never once doubting the strength beneath the layers. We moved in together. Slowly at first, just a drawer, then a closet, then a key. He brought stability. I brought passion. And somewhere in the middle, we found home. One afternoon, while reorganizing our shared bookshelf, I found a letter tucked between two old paperbacks. It was addressed to me, but I didn't recognize the handwriting. I opened it carefully. It was from my grandmother. She had been quiet at the dinner, hadn't said a word, just watched. But her letter spoke volumes. "Dear Isabella," it began, "I've seen many things in my life, wars, births, deaths, regret. But nothing struck me quite like watching you stand up for yourself that night. I wish I had done the same in my youth. I wish I had spoken louder. You have changed the course of this family, for the better. I only hope the others catch up." I pressed the letter to my chest and closed my eyes. For the first time, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Vindicated, yes, but also deeply seen. The months rolled on. Wedding plans began. We decided to keep it small, just the people who had truly supported us. There were no obligations, no extended family guilt trips, just joy. I walked down the aisle in a dress I chose for me, not for a photograph, not for tradition, not to impress anyone. I didn't wear my mother's pearls. I didn't carry something borrowed. I carried something earned, peace. And yet, just when I thought the storm had passed, one last gust came. A week before the wedding, I received a letter. No return address. Inside was a photograph of me and Nathan, taken from a distance, and a single sentence scribbled underneath: "You can't escape where you come from." I stared at it for a long time, and then I smiled, because they were wrong. I hadn't escaped. I had risen. And the difference between running and rising is simple. When you run, you leave everything behind. When you rise, you bring your truth with you, and dare anyone to try and bury it again. That day, I burned the letter, not out of fear, but as a final act of release. I had outgrown their cages, their whispers, their warnings. And from the ashes of their judgment, I was building a life of my own, a life they would never touch again. The wedding was everything I never thought I wanted. It was quiet, intimate, drenched in sincerity rather than spectacle. There were no massive floral arrangements, no dramatic entrances, no overpriced catering, just people who mattered. People who had stood by us when it wasn't easy, when it wasn't pretty. People who didn't just love the version of me that smiled in photographs. They loved the version that shook, cried, doubted, and fought. They loved the version of me that clawed her way out of the shadows. We got married on a hilltop just outside Huntsville. The air was warm and the sky stretched out in soft blues and golds. Nathan wore a simple gray suit, no tie, sleeves rolled. I wore a satin dress that moved like water, my hair pinned loosely with tiny wildflowers. I walked toward him barefoot, because the heels felt like a performance. And I was done performing. As we said our vows, I didn't shake. My voice didn't crack. There were no tears, just this unshakable calm inside me, a calm I had earned. I promised to love him, to choose him, to walk beside him, not because he completed me, but because he saw me whole and chose me anyway. And he, in turn, promised never to silence me, never to clip my wings, never to shrink me down just to feel bigger. He promised to be a mirror, not a mold, a partner, not a captor. When we kissed, the guests applauded, but it was more than applause. It felt like an affirmation, like the universe whispering, "You made it." For a while, everything was still, peaceful. But silence, I've learned, isn't always peace. Sometimes it's the pause before a storm. 3 weeks after the wedding, I received a phone call from Jenna. Her voice was tight, like she was holding something back. "I didn't want to ruin your honeymoon," she said, "but you need to know what's happening." My mother was speaking at a local women's club event in downtown Huntsville. She was talking about resilience through hardship, about holding your family together during challenging times, and, most pointedly, about learning to forgive difficult daughters who don't understand the value of grace. She didn't name me, but everyone knew. She was rewriting the narrative. Again, turning herself into the victim. Again, using coded language, veiled metaphors, weaponizing the very pain she caused to paint herself as the wounded hero in someone else's story. Mine. I could have ignored it. Let her live in her fiction. But something inside me snapped. Not from anger, but from clarity. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about reclaiming the last piece of power she'd tried to hold. So I went. The next day, I dressed carefully. Not to impress, but to armor myself. No makeup, hair pulled back, a plain blouse tucked into slacks, no jewelry, nothing performative, just presence. I walked into the community center where the event was being held. The room was half filled, mostly older women sipping coffee, nodding along to her carefully chosen words. I stood at the back, invisible at first, but not for long. She saw me in the middle of her story, paused mid-sentence, her eyes catching mine, her throat tightening around the next word. She recovered quickly. She always did. But I had seen it. The fear. She wrapped up her speech with a flourish, taking questions from the audience, and I waited until the very end. Then I raised my hand. The room turned to see who I was. She hesitated, then nodded. Yes? In the back? I stepped forward slowly, letting my footsteps echo in the quiet space. My name is Isabella Carter, I said. Some of you may know me as her daughter. A few murmurs rippled through the crowd. Her face froze. I wasn't planning to speak today, but since my life has been used as an example, I feel obligated to correct the record. I took a breath. My mother is a master storyteller. That much is true. But what she fails to include in her stories is the cost. The people who were manipulated, isolated, silenced. She speaks of forgiveness, but not of accountability, of grace, but not of control. She talks about resilience, but she never mentions who she pushed down to rise. Someone gasped. Another woman dropped her pen. My mother tried to speak, but I raised my voice just enough to cut through. I'm not here to embarrass her. I'm here to tell the truth. For too long, I stayed silent. I played along. I believed I was broken because I couldn't meet her expectations. But I'm not broken. I'm free. And freedom doesn't come from making others small. It comes from finally believing you are enough. I turned to leave, not waiting for applause, not waiting for confrontation. But a woman near the front stood and said, "Thank you." Then another, and suddenly, I wasn't alone. Outside, the wind was picking up. It carried the scent of damp earth and new beginnings. I walked back to my car and sat for a long while, the adrenaline still coursing through me. Later that evening, my phone buzzed again. A message from an unknown number. It was a video. Someone had recorded my words. It was spreading. By midnight, it had made its way into several local forums, reposted with titles like "Daughter Confronts Toxic Mother with Poise and Power" and "Breaking Generational Chains." I was flooded with messages. Strangers thanking me for voicing their silent pain, friends saying they never knew what I had been carrying. The ripple had begun, but with it came something else. A letter, delivered to our apartment mailbox in a cream envelope. No return address again. Inside was a handwritten note. "You've won your little war, but you've lost your family. Hope it was worth it." I laughed. A deep, raw, honest laugh, because what they never understood was I didn't lose my family. I shed them, like old skin that no longer fit. And what I had gained in its place was something far more sacred. A partner who loved me fully, a truth that couldn't be rewritten, and a self I was finally proud of. Nathan found me on the balcony that night, barefoot, wine glass in hand, watching the city lights flicker below. "What now?" he asked. I looked at him. Now we live. But even as I said it, I knew one more chapter was waiting, because somewhere deep down, I sensed she wasn't done, and neither was I. 3 months passed. Seasons changed, but the tension didn't. The letter had been her final whisper, but I knew better than to believe silence meant surrender. My mother was many things. Manipulative, cold, calculating, but passive wasn't one of them. For a while I pretended not to care. I threw myself into work, into love, into the small, beautiful moments Nathan and I were building together. Morning coffees in bed, evenings with books and soft jazz, weekend road trips to nowhere. Life was good. Not perfect, but honest. It had weight and depth and laughter that didn't come with strings. Still, in the quiet moments when Nathan was asleep and the house was still, I'd catch myself holding my breath, waiting. The day it came, it wasn't a letter. It wasn't a message. It was a knock. I opened the door and found her standing there. My mother, hair swept back, makeup flawless, dressed in a beige coat that probably cost more than my entire living room set. Her lips were pressed into a line, Not quite a smile. Not quite a frown. "I'd like to come in," she said. I didn't move. "Why?" She looked past me, into the apartment. "Because I think it's time." I let her in. Not because I believed she'd changed, but because I needed to see her in my world, not the other way around. She walked slowly, as if inspecting the life she'd once tried to ruin. Her eyes grazed the photos on the wall, the open book on the coffee table, the coffee mugs in the sink. She sat on the edge of the couch like it might burn her. "I saw the video," she said after a long pause. "I know. I didn't expect you to humiliate me like that. I didn't expect you to try to destroy my life." She flinched, just for a second. Then she took a breath. "I never meant to hurt you. But you did." Her eyes met mine, and for the first time, they didn't look sharp. They looked tired. "I don't know why I do the things I do," she said quietly. "I suppose I thought I was protecting you." "No, you were protecting your control." The words landed with weight. She blinked, looked away. "I hated watching you grow into someone I didn't understand. You weren't like the others. You didn't follow. You didn't need me the way I needed you to. And instead of accepting that, I tried to break you." There it was. The truth. Naked. Ugly. Raw. I sat down across from her, the air between us thick. "Do you expect forgiveness?" "No," she whispered. "Good. Because I don't have that for you. Not now. Maybe not ever." She nodded. And then, to my surprise, she stood. "I won't ask for anything. I wanted to see you. One last time." She started to walk toward the door, then paused. "I hope he's good to you," she said. "Really good. He is." She nodded again, then left. No dramatic goodbye. No apology, just a quiet exit. I stood there for a long while, letting the weight of it all settle into the room. Nathan came home an hour later, found me sitting on the floor with Maxine curled in my lap. "You okay?" She came by. He didn't ask who. He knew. "Did she get what she wanted?" "No," I said. "But I did. And I meant it. Because for the first time, I had looked her in the eyes and spoken without fear. I hadn't screamed. I hadn't cried. I had stood in my truth and watched her face it. Not to punish her, not even to change her, but to free myself. Closure isn't always a clean cut. Sometimes it's a slow letting go. 1,000 invisible threads finally loosening until you can breathe without them pulling. The days that followed were quiet, lighter. Jenna came by more often. She and I started a podcast together, talking about generational trauma, difficult family dynamics, the journey of unlearning. It started small, just us, a mic, and a living room full of echo. But the messages began to pour in. People from all over the country saying, "I thought I was alone." Nathan and I adopted a dog. Charlie, a scrappy mutt with one ear that didn't stand straight and eyes that had seen things. He fit perfectly with Maxine. Imperfect, messy, and full of love. On our first wedding anniversary, Nathan surprised me with a short trip to Savannah. He'd booked a small bed and breakfast, the kind with creaky floors and a view of moss-draped trees. On the second night, we sat on the porch wrapped in blankets, sipping wine while a thunderstorm rolled in the distance. "You know," he said, brushing my hair back, "if you ever want to confront her again, I'll stand by you." "I know," I said, "but I don't need to." The storm got closer. The sky flickered. "I used to think revenge had to be loud," I continued. "Dramatic, destructive. But now I think maybe the best kind of revenge is just living well, fully, unapologetically, without letting them live inside your head anymore." He nodded, pulled me closer. "You're not the woman they raised." "I know," I said. "I'm the woman I chose to become." And that, more than anything, was the real victory. The next week, I received one final envelope. This one was different. No threats, no hidden message. Just a photo. Me, as a child, in my mother's lap. Back when I still believed she was my hero. On the back, in careful script, were 5 words. "I hope you stay free." I didn't cry. I didn't frame it. I tucked it into a drawer. Not out of bitterness, but out of understanding. Not all villains are monsters. Some are just broken people clinging to control because they've never known anything else. And not all heroes wear armor. Some just learn how to say no, how to walk away, how to rebuild from the ruins without asking for permission. And that's what I did. I rebuilt. On my terms. And the life I built? It's not perfect. But it's mine. 2 years later, I stood in the same backyard where everything had once unraveled. The same uneven grass, the same patio light strung between trees, the same faded brick path leading to the garden my grandmother used to tend with her bare hands. But everything else was different now. The air, the silence, me. It wasn't a family gathering this time. It wasn't a staged event meant to impress or shame. It was a fundraiser. Small, community-driven, built from something real. Jenna and I had grown our podcast into a small movement. It started as conversations, then workshops, then a foundation. We called it The Unquiet Women, a space where daughters, sisters, wives, and mothers could speak truth without fear of being labeled bitter or broken. We hosted conversations in libraries, churches, schools. We were invited to speak on panels about healing, about setting boundaries, about the power of saying enough. And tonight, we brought it full circle, here, to this house, because it felt right. Not out of spite, but reclamation. Because I had once felt so small here, so voiceless. And now my voice filled this space with stories not just of pain, but of power. Nathan stood in the crowd, hands in his pockets, his smile calm and steady. He didn't need to say anything. His presence was its own kind of support. He had always understood that loving me meant giving me space to grow, even when it meant confronting the ghosts that used to keep me quiet. I gave a short speech, thanked everyone for coming, and stepped off the little makeshift platform we'd built. People clapped, and in that applause, I heard something I'd never felt at family events. Genuine warmth, not politeness, not performance, just human connection. After the crowd thinned out and volunteers began folding chairs, Jenna came up behind me and handed me a cup of cold sweet tea. "You were amazing," she said. "They needed to hear that." "I needed to say it," I replied. She looked at the garden fence for a long moment. "I haven't been back here since everything." "Yeah," I nodded. "Neither have I." We walked the yard in silence, letting the past and present breathe side by side. Somewhere between the rose bush and the rusted gate, she touched my arm gently. She would have hated this. "My mother?" I asked. She nodded. She probably would have accused me of making a spectacle. "But it's not a spectacle," Jenna said. "It's a resurrection." I smiled. Later that night, I sat alone in the quiet kitchen, the room dimly lit by the string lights still glowing outside. I sipped the last of my tea and thought about all the versions of myself that had existed in this very house. The girl who stayed quiet, the teenager who internalized shame, the young woman who believed love was something to earn, and now, the woman who no longer needed anyone's permission to be whole. I didn't hear the door open, but I felt it. The shift in air. The old floor creaked once. She walked in like she belonged there, and maybe, once, she had. My mother looked older, not just in skin, but in posture. Time had softened her, but it hadn't erased the weight of the past. "You look strong," she said after a long pause. "I am." Her eyes flicked around the kitchen. "This place feels different." "It is." She sat at the edge of the table without being asked. I didn't stop her. "I heard about the foundation. I saw the interview on TV. And? I thought you'd take everything and disappear," she said. "Forget about all of us." "I tried," I admitted. "But healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering without bleeding." She looked down at her hands. "I never knew how to mother you. Not really." "I know. I wanted you to be like the others. Predictable, easy, grateful. I was never meant to be small," I said. "And you punished me for growing." She didn't argue. "I want to say I'm sorry," she whispered. "But I know it's too late for that." "Maybe," I said. "But I don't need your apology to move on." She nodded, tears brimming but not falling. "What do you need?" she asked. And for the first time, I answered without flinching. "I need you to stop trying to rewrite my story. Stop showing up in places you don't belong just to remind me of what you did. I've moved forward. You should too. I don't know how. That's not my job anymore." Silence filled the room again, but it wasn't hostile. Just tired, like a storm that had burned itself out. She stood slowly, as if unsure if she should say more. "Goodbye, Isabella. Goodbye, Mom." And just like that, she left. I didn't cry. I didn't collapse. I didn't question my words. I just stood and locked the door behind her, not as a rejection, but as a release. Months passed. The seasons shifted again. Nathan and I traveled. We published a book. We started hosting weekend retreats. Charlie and Maxine grew older, and we learned to cherish their quiet presence even more. My world didn't just grow, it deepened. And sometimes, at night, I still thought about that moment in the backyard when Nathan proposed. About how I'd once thought that ring was the reward, but it wasn't. The real reward was never the proposal. It was the fire that built me, the fire they tried to extinguish, the fire that still burns. Now, whenever I speak at events, I end with the same sentence. They told me I'd die alone, so I lived, loudly. And every time, someone in the audience cries. Not because it's tragic, but because it's true. And truth, once spoken aloud, becomes something no one can ever take back, especially not the people who tried so hard to silence it. I am Isabella Carter. I am a daughter, a wife, a survivor, a storyteller. And this is not a tragedy. This is my triumph. Have you ever been told you'd end up alone, only to prove everyone wrong by building a life filled with strength, love, and self-worth? Leave a comment below. I want to hear your story. If this journey moved you in any way, please like the video and subscribe for more powerful stories like this one. Share it with someone who's been doubted, dismissed, or made to feel like they weren't enough. Because the truth is, healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means rising anyway. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember, you owe no one your silence, and your voice was never too loud. It was just waiting to be heard.